Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I just saw Civil War about an hour ago and I have some thoughts and I want to hammer these out while they're fresh in my head. Let's jump right into it. This is directed by Alex Garland, who you will perhaps know from directing Ex Machina back in 2014. Then he went on to do Annihilation and Men. I honestly like all of his prior films. Men is definitely the most mixed in terms of critical reception. I thought it was okay, if a bit too ambiguous. And now he's made a fictional war film that depicts a United States that are not so united. In fact, they're very divided, and there is a nationwide violent conflict occurring. I think this movie was a little bit mismarketed. I could see someone who's a very casual moviegoer watching the trailer and going to this expecting it to be a Michael Bay or Roland Emmerich type disaster film in which there are just constant explosions and shootouts. It's not that. And then there's probably other people who are going into this expecting there to be some kind of political agenda behind it, or fearing that there's going to be a political agenda. It's not that either, so if you're concerned about that, I'm pleased to inform you that Civil War is relatively politically neutral. So what is the movie about then, Josh, if it's not about politics and it's not about big action sequences? Well, the truth is it's about a small group of photojournalists who are traveling the country and documenting the warfare as it's occurring. A couple of impressive actors lead this. Kirsten Dunst plays the main character, who has been a photojournalist for a long time and has a lot of experience in war photography. Kaylee Spaney is a newcomer, a younger person who kind of joins in with her small group and is interested in getting started. There are a few other characters that join in with them at various points throughout the film, but these are the main two characters and the ones that are focused on the most. One thing that is kind of troubling about Civil War is that despite the title, it doesn't really give you much information about what started or triggered this Civil War. We don't even really know the beliefs or conditions of either side. We just know that there's this Western forces and then there's like the current government. And that's not really a bad thing because this does focus on war photographers, and their job is to go in, document the chaos, take photos of dead bodies and violence and horrific things, and be completely unbiased. And that's their job. They can't be bothered or perturbed by what happens because it will affect their work and their mental status. And what this film does so well is it takes this relationship between this very experienced war photographer and someone who's very new to the job and creates this dynamic where they affect each other throughout the movie, and it goes in some interesting directions later on. Lee, who is played by Kirsten Dunst, is like world-renowned for her work, yet she becomes a bit shaken over the course of the film. And at first I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense because she's supposedly has so much experience. But there's a line in the film in which she says something along the lines of, when I was in this third world country or that third world country doing my job, I thought I was sending out a warning to our country, and it turns out it was all for nothing. That was interesting, and upon reflecting on the character progressions in this film, I actually think there's a lot of really clever screenwriting in there. The screenwriting is not flawless though. There are definitely some sequences in which the dialogue felt very robotic to me, and again, it conveys information that is important to the characters. I just feel they could have found more clever ways to have the characters convey that information without it sounding so wooden and stiff and not like I'm watching real human beings talk. So all in all, it is a bit off-putting that the film doesn't really address the cause of this conflict whatsoever, but I was so swept up in the story of these photojournalists and their little bubble as they're on this road trip across the country that I think that makes up for it. You know, it doesn't need to be exactly what I expect going into it. And I suppose you could pick up other messages too that are pretty much commonplace with every war film, that being war sucks, violence sucks. When you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, people are dying that don't need to die. And sure, you could say that's been played out year after year as more and more war films come out with essentially the same agenda, but it doesn't change how effective it is, man. I mean, there are scenes in this where it gets very heavy, despite the fact that you don't know much about a lot of these more minor characters that are involved in the conflict. You still feel for them when you see them bleeding out on the ground dying. So I guess I should give a disclaimer that it does get kind of heavy at times, and if that's something that will bother you, maybe you shouldn't watch this. One sequence that features Jesse Plemons, you can see it in the trailer, it's just filled with nail-biting suspense. I was on the edge of my seat. And the film is very good at crafting these sequences in which the characters enter these very rural areas and they encounter other people and you don't know what their allegiances are. They may not have an allegiance at all. They may just be rogue looters who are going to do whatever the hell they want to whoever they want, which also makes me question why they even bother to wear these vests that say press on them, like as if half these people are going to care. Sometimes I think the main characters are a little too complacent and not concerned for their own well-being. But I suppose they kind of accept the risks that go into this job, and people that do this in real life have to do that as well. As far as the action goes, again, it's not an action movie, but it does have some very action-heavy sequences, and I think this is the highest budget ever used for an A24 film. And the money was very well spent. It looks good. The cinematography is fantastic. As far as issues that I have with it, I mentioned the robotic dialogue, which is not a problem throughout, but there are just lines that didn't come off right to me, and it seemed like they could have improved some of these character interactions. Another thing I want to point out is, although I'm glad that it doesn't get too political and try to pick a side or even convey what each side of this conflict believes, I wish that we would have gotten a little bit of an explanation as to what caused this war. It's just difficult to become connected to the world when you know literally nothing about why such a massive conflict is occurring, to the point that Americans are running around shooting each other. I mean, there's a reason this hasn't happened in several centuries. And this might be a nitpick, but at one point on their journey to DC, which is where their final destination is, they come across this smaller town in which everyone's going about their daily lives like normal, like before the war started. They walk into a shop and ask the attendant, "Do you guys know that there's a giant civil war going on?" And she just replies, "Yeah, we're kind of just trying to stay out of it." And that was kind of a weird scene to me. I was like, how can any town in the entire country go about its normal business? And meanwhile, like 20 minutes later, they're encountering this rogue militia who's trying to kill them. I'm just not sure that I buy that anyone would be going about their normal days. I do have one other big issue, and it occurs in the third act, so I don't really want to talk about it because it's very spoiler heavy. It's impossible to talk about it actually without spoiling the movie, which I don't want to do. But it just came off as a little cheap to me. And maybe the more I think about it, the more it'll make sense and click. But I kind of saw it coming and I was like, oh, please don't do that. That would be kind of cheap and contrived. But they did it. It doesn't make or break the film or anything. In fact, I think the actual closing lines of dialogue are very effective in conveying kind of what this entire film is going for. So as a whole, I really dug Civil War. Giving it a final score is tough for me because there are some things that don't work, but the moments that work so well that I'm willing to overpraise this rather than underpraise it. So Civil War, it's gonna get a 4 out of 5 from me. Despite the fact that it doesn't really get into politics at all, this is going to be a very polarizing film for a lot of reasons. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Drop down into the comments and let me know if you've seen Civil War, what your thoughts are. If you want more content like this, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe while you're at it, and I'll catch you guys in the next review. See you later.